and the great texts of the past, well, that's not how anybody really does business in the classroom. Let me broaden the point. Amy Gutmann said something important in her recent book entitled Democratic Education, and I quote, "In a democracy, political disagreement is not something that we should generally seek to avoid. Political controversies over our educational problems are a particularly important source of social progress because they have the potential for educating so many citizens." Now, I think Gutmann's right. I think a lot of us feel that any clamor or conflict over the curriculum is just a bad thing in itself, that it somehow undermines the legitimacy of the institutions of knowledge, a sort of no news is good news attitude on the subject of higher education. They think that if you even look at a university cross-eyed, it'll dry up and blow away, and then where will we all be? Whereas I think one of the most renewing activities we can do is to rethink the institutions where we teach people to think. We invest in myths of continuity, but universities have constantly been molting and creating themselves anew for the last millennium, and there is absolutely no reason to think that they'll change in the next millennium. Jerry Graff at Northwestern has been saying, where there's no consensus, and believe me, there is no consensus, teach the conflicts. In fact, I think at the better colleges, we do teach the conflicts because we don't have a choice. We don't seem able not to. And that's nothing to be embarrassed about because college isn't kindergarten. Our job isn't to present a seemingly dignified, united front to our students. College students are too old to form. We shouldn't delude ourselves, but they are not too old to challenge. I'm reminded of something that the great college president and educator Robert Maynard Hutchins wrote in a book he published at the height of the McCarthy era. He recounted a conversation he'd had with a distinguished doctor about the attempt of the Board of Regents of the University of California to extort, as Hutchins put it, an illegal and unconstitutional oath of loyalty from the faculty of that great institution. Yes, but, the doctor said, if we are going to hire these people to look after our children, we are entitled to know what their opinions are. And Hutchins grandly responded, I think it is clear that the collapse of liberal education in the United States is related as cause or effect, or both, to the notion that professors are people who are hired to look after children. Wise words, those. In all events, the sort of pluralism that I've been advocating this evening has one evolutionary advantage over its opponents. If you ask, how do we form a consensus around such a decentering proposal? The answer is that it doesn't exactly require a consensus, which is why, in the words of John Dewey, pluralism is the greatest philosophical idea of our times. But not that this puts us home free. As Dewey went on to say, what philosophers have got to do is to work out a fresh analysis of the relations between the one and the many. Our shrinking world presents that issue today in 1,000 different forms. How are we going to make the most of the new values we set on variety, difference, individuality? How are we going to realize their possibilities in every field and at the same time not sacrifice that plurality to the cooperation we need so much? How, Dewey asks, can we bring together things as we must without losing sight of plurality? Well, learning without center is not learning without focus. We've all seen undigested eclecticism posing as a bold new synthesis. But to read and write culture anew means additional demands of rigor and coherence, not emancipation from rigor and coherence. I take Dewey's question seriously, but there's nothing vaporous about the form the answer takes. It's made of brick and mortar, and sometimes a little ivy above the architrave. For us, scholars and teachers, it is the university whose constant refashioning is our charge, our burden, and our privilege. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, in the words of the black tradition, ask me a question. I'll do this as long as my throat holds up. Yes. Oh, you mean the plagiarism? Well, it looks to be pretty clear that Martin Luther King plagiarized his dissertation. But, Martin Luther King's not here to tell us how this happened. Some people say, the libraries were segregated and, he was working under adverse conditions. But my take really is that of the New York Times editorial, which responded to it. And it ended with, he did not plagiarize his power. And, we didn't give Martin Luther King the Nobel Prize because of the brilliance of his dissertation. Yes, in the back. Well, I think that all cultures represent their gods in their own image, or they should, unless their minds have been colonized. I mean, the reason that they're represented as white because people in the Renaissance painted them that way to look like Italians and et cetera, et cetera. Everybody should paint their gods in their own color, after themselves. I mean, otherwise it doesn't make sense to me. Of course it's had, the idea of, I think on women, the idea that God was some old white man with a beard must not have been the greatest, most liberating idea. For me, God looks like Uncle Ben, on the rice. I love that rice. I eat that rice every day. Yes. Which book? I don't know it. Tell me about it. Oh, really? Oh, well, I got to get that. That's fuel for my speech. I have a problem with his argument. Make it whiter. No, it's true. Look at the new great books. I'm presently in a battle with Mortimer Adler and the Britannica Corporation over their new great books. Now, let me make it clear. I don't believe in the idea of great books, that we can get a committee together and these are the definitive texts. That's the nuttiest idea. That's an American idea. But since they're there and being marketed, I want our people to be represented too, right? Because these things have a big impact on popular culture, on the sort of the middle class mind. So they have a new edition of the great books, 130 authors, all white, 4 women. Now, what kind of sense does that make? I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever. They had a chance to turn the century, define a whole new concept of civilization, at least for that market. And they refused to do it. Instead of looking forward to the 21st century, they look backwards to the 19th. And it really upsets me. In fact, when Al Sharpton gets out of the hospital, I'm going to tell him about it. I don't see how anybody black could buy those books. Or any woman, really. Ms. Terra is just stupid. I think we need, our own sort of, world's great books or something. I mean, we don't need it, but we do. It's very complicated. I mean, as you can see from my argument, it's a very liberal reformist position. It's a middle-of-the-road position between two extremes. And I think it's a pretty good, solid position, too, by the way. But so I'm always working for compromise. If they're going to have the great books, let's have more women. If they're going to have it, let's have more people of color, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I think is wrong in the multicultural movement, my talk, Goodbye Columbus, is a critique of the excesses of the multicultural movement. This idea, I'll tell you a story. I was talking to a dean of a prestigious liberal arts college, And I just read the statistics, this was last spring, that Berkeley last year was 70%, its enrollment was 70% non-white. In fact, I was so surprised I thought it was a typo. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. 7 out of 10 people at Berkeley were not white. And I said, do you think your college would ever have a 70% non-white enrollment? He said, never. That would completely change our identity as a center of the liberal arts. And that conflation between demographics and knowledge in that way, many of us on the cultural left make. You know, we're 10% of the population, so 10% of the great books should be black. It's ridiculous. That is not a logical argument. So if you're 1%, only 1% of the books should be whatever you are. It's crazy. But it's interesting that the change of the student body, the change of the demographics of student bodies across the country, that the change has led to demands for more color, more gendered kind of curricula. So the impulse was wrong, or it was right in intent but wrong in origin somehow. And I think that we have to be aware of that and critique it because it's a problem. You know, there is a strange slippage between representation, meaning, think of representation meaning in the terms of demographic representation, apportionment, delegation, and representation in the curriculum, and the representation of an ethnic group. Those three, there's a slippage among those terms, those usages, and we tend to get them mixed up, and the results can be quite devastating. The burdens of representation on an artist of color, for instance, James Baldwin wrote, are well nigh unbearable. You know, being forced to represent 35 million black people. You know, I mean, that's crazy. Nobody represents 35 million black people. Who represents 35 million white people? You know, I mean, it's bizarre. And I think that it's time for us to look at some of those slippages and get rid of them. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't say that I was anti-canon. I said we should reform the notion of core curriculum and diversify it. You always lose people, but if you look at how Western Civ was taught at Columbia in 1930 and how it's taught today, it's not the same course. If you look at how the introduction to the American novel before 1950 was taught here in 1960 and how it was taught last semester, I bet that there are vast differences in the syllabus. What happened to those people? People come in, out. You know, anyone who knows the history of criticism knows texts come in and out, go in and out of taste, in and out of favor, often determined by two interesting things. One, a strong critical reading from a scholar, and by the kind of popular novels that are rewriting the great texts of the past. Because literary history is always backwards, right? It's always in retrospect. So that, our understanding of how the texts related to each other is always redefined by what comes next. And so I don't take that argument seriously. Yes, people should know who Machiavelli is, and no question about that. But I didn't read The Prince at Yale when I was an undergraduate in a Western Civ course. Yeah, I read it on my own. And, we have to have suggested reading lists. I think it bothers me more that people haven't read The Souls of Black Folk. Right? I mean, ever, as part of these introduction to Western civilization courses. Mortimer Adler said that we were debating in the Times, and I said, he said none of the black people were smart enough. None of the black people, I have to be fair, satisfied the three criteria for having written a great book. So I said, what about Du Bois? They asked him, and he said, he got 2 out of the 3. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, like the song says. It's crazy. But you see what I mean? There are always choices. There are always suggested reading lists. We don't have to spoon feed these kids. They can go out and read them. And I have books on my syllabus the kids don't read, which doesn't stop them. which doesn't stop them from talking about him in class. Back to the what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Right. I'm following the Black to the Future. And then I don't think that you can learn through. He's talking about, of course, E.D. Hirsch's cultural literacy, which I riffed on. The idea of lists, I think, is a very nice guy. I mean, I know him. And, but I think the idea of lists, unlike Alan Bloom, I mean, I don't know Alan Bloom, but I mean, his work, he seems to be up to bad work to me. You know, bad business. Hirsch, I think, is just wrong. You know, but not nasty about it. You know, Alan Bloom has a whole ideological axe to grind. Hirsch just wants to reform the educational system. But I don't think you do it through lists. I mean, my critique of him was, one, I don't like lists. Two, it was another all-white set of texts. I mean, he had some people of color and women, but not enough. So now he does new editions. He's very open to criticism. And he's bringing more women and more people of color into his dictionaries and all that. But I just think it's wrongheaded. I didn't learn that way. Neither did you. Nobody in this room learned by memorizing lists, except vocabulary classes when you're trying to pass the SATs or something like that. But that's not how our education was constructed. And that seems to be what he wants to do. I don't think that that's right. Look, I believe that there are wonderful merits of a common culture. But we've had, in America, the myth of a common culture, which has really been a very narrow Anglo-American regional culture, which has passed itself off as universal. You know who's very eloquent about this? You'd never believe it. Norman Podhoretz, of all people, in his autobiography, Making It. When I was in the hospital in August, I read this. Somebody gave me a copy of his book, and I read it. I said, what do I want to read this? I can't say it here, but for it. So, you know, you're laying there. Nothing I could do. I couldn't get out of bed. So I read it. And it was magnificent. But he's very eloquent on what it was like being a Jewish person at Columbia and suffering under this myth of Western civilization and universality. It's spectacular. It should be required reading, I think, for freshmen. And what I want to see is the production of a new common culture, one that accounts for the new Americans, the new visible Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans, and African Americans, the old Americans, Native Americans, you know, so that we can have a real public culture. I mean, of course, as soon as you leave the United States, you realize how American you are. As soon as you go to Africa, as soon as you go to Asia, as soon as you go anywhere. But still, when you come back and what is passed off as our common culture is something that is alien to many of us. I mean, I was so relieved when I heard a white person, actually it was Larry Levine, Lawrence Levine, the great historian at Berkeley, tell me how much he hated Ozzie and Harriet because it made him feel bad. Because it was nothing like, he said his parents used to argue and fight and they didn't have enough food and all that stuff. Well, then I said, wow, you know, everybody felt that way. Not just me. You know, we walked around feeling cheated. I mean, I had a great family. But I thought, man, that is a heavy way to live. Like, Leave It to Beaver, they had a nice house, you know. When my wife and I bought our first house, we looked at each other and said, this is just like Wally and the Beaver, you know. That's what a house was supposed to be. I'd like to do a survey of people our age and find out how many people had this kind of fantasy of what this thing was supposed to be like. Except now I want it to be like Bill Cosby's. Bill Cosby got a nice pad on that TV show. If you had all that square footage in Brooklyn Heights, you are a billionaire. You know, for some reason, that reminds me of, I don't know if you watch Nightline. Before I had kids, I used to watch Nightline. And, now I'm too tired. But one night, Spike Lee and Donald Trump were on Nightline. Now, I've spent the last 2 years trying to figure out what they could have been debating. The recession, right? And Donald Trump, with a straight face, looked at Ted Koppel and said, you know, Ted, if I had to do it all over again and I could come back, I would come back as an educated black man. And you know what I thought? That's funny, I thought, because if I had to do it all over again and I could come back, I'd come back as Donald Trump. Anyway, that's a long way from common culture, but Machiavelli, yeah, Machiavelli is important for all of us to know about. But I think that argument is used I know you're not using it that way, but used in a dishonest way by people on the right who just say, what? No, no Machiavelli, no Spinoza, then the whole civilization's falling apart. It's just rubbish. You can do without a whole lot of people and bring them back in some other way. And the well-educated read this stuff on their own anyway. You can't teach. You know where I grew up by now, right? So there's a college called Potomac State College. And nobody ever leaves my hometown. Nobody. Everybody works at that paper mill, generations of people there. All my cousins live there. I go home for my mother's family reunion. Every July, it's always the last Saturday and Sunday of July. And it's great. My kids love it. And I love it. It's where I recharge my cultural batteries. It's my family. I'm little Skippy Gates. That's what I am. That's what I'll always be. And they'll say things to me. They did when I left for Yale, and they do now. They'll say, Potomac State, name of the junior college, Potomac State College, said, it's ranked number 1 in this class. And I'll say, yeah, I know. And it's not, of course, right? And they'll say, it's just like those big schools. They just have more of it. So Yale just has more classes like they have, because the notion is that there is a definable unit of education, and it has to do with an access to a text, to a textbook, and that as long as you have that access, all things are equal in American higher education. And it's a wonderfully naive notion of education. It's just not true, of course. But that fascinates me. It's somehow. Yes. Like Nat was here. Yeah, he asked me for a copy of Goodbye Columbus after it was raised so much hell at the American Studies Association. Sure. Well, you have to remember you're talking to a man who testified for Two Live Crew when you're talking about issues of the First Amendment. And I'm willing to take any question about that, too. Some of you people probably sent me some of that hate mail I got. I'm pretty much a First Amendment person. But, Mr. Justice Holmes' caveat, right? When is it crying fire in a crowded theater? And I don't know. It's a line I try to... I really would need a specific case to comment on it. In general, I err on the side of free speech, if I have to put it in the most abstract way. I don't think I would have kicked that kid out of Brown for, I don't know. It's tough. Expulsion is a pretty heavy thing. In a civilized society, in institutions of higher education, we shouldn't need codes. We are supposed to live codes. So I don't know what a code does. Don't call me nigger, right? I have to write that down and tell somebody that? It's ridiculous. I can't figure out what the codes are meant to accomplish to intelligent people who are 18 to 22 years old. I think we have to begin to address the problems producing the racial epithets. I think that's much more important, rather than reacting merely to, black people get together, they call white people names. White people, I'm sure, y'all know what you do when you're behind closed doors. I don't know, I've never been there. But I think we should keep our sense of humor. I think a lot of ethnic humor is funny. I'm the person also who defended Amos and Andy coming back, right? I don't think that, many of the things that are good old-fashioned ethnic humor are not. I think sometimes our middle-class sensibilities are, you know what I'm trying to say, need to be gotten rid of. But it bothers me that, as I said, what were once bastions of liberal education have become arenas for ethnic conflict. When I was an undergraduate, I mean, I couldn't wait to go back to college, away from the backwoods of West Virginia where all these rednecks live. You know, people treated me in a dignified way. I could be black as the ace of spades and nobody minded. But today, that's not the way it is. And doing the hard work of analyzing that change, that shift, figuring out its relationship to economic scarcity, to which it's of course related, is much more difficult, so people focus on the effect rather than the cause. Yes? Yeah, I mean, I think there should be codes of behavior in general, which all institutions have. And if the use of language is an infringement somehow on that, that's okay. But I think once we start tampering the First Amendment, it becomes very, very dangerous. Just as we've done with censorship cases. I mean, I think Miller versus California, through which the First Amendment cases are interpreted, is a terrible, terrible decision. What's Miller versus California? It says that you have to defend a work against censorship, in effect, you have to show that it has scientific, artistic, or political merit, which is why the expert witness in the Mapplethorpe trial testified in one of the photographs of fisting about the angle of the elbow, which, you know, in my hometown, people thought was ridiculous. But the reason was, what elbow? What are you talking about, boy? That is some crazy stuff going on there. And the reason she had to testify about the angle of the elbow was because of Miller versus California. She had to find us that. And of course, those photographs are fantastic photographs. And they won. I mean, I never dreamed that they would win in Cincinnati. But they did. And likewise, when I testified for Two Live Crew, I had to testify about the artistic and political merits of their music. That was it. You know, you can't make some vague appeal to the First Amendment because it feels good. And you're some, you know, believer in liberty. It doesn't work that way. Oh, you asked one. Yes. Well, in general, I'm against single-sex schools, right? I definitely did not want to go to one. And I hope, my daughters, I mean, if it's up to me, would not go to one. So I have some problems with that. That's the first thing. But on the other hand, and the second thing I have to say before I flip, is that I haven't seen the curricula of these schools. And until I do, I can't make an intelligent comment on it. But I started off skeptical. But still, I want to see what it is that they're teaching and how they're going about it. I don't want it to be simplistically Afrocentric or something like that. But on the other hand, our people are in a terribly disastrous situation. And everything else has failed. So I say, give somebody some money, treat it as a laboratory, and let's see if it works. I mean, what's it going to hurt? And if it works, let's take, whatever works about it, let's take and imitate it. And if it doesn't work, what have you lost? A couple $1 million is chump change. When you're talking about saving a whole people. I mean, if you take the functional illiteracy rate for black people 2 years ago was 45%. Functional literacy is defined as most of you know, I'm sure, the capacity to read the front page of a local newspaper. That's 4.5 out of 10 black people. Now you add up to that the out of wedlock birth rate and and pick the average lifespan. You can pick any of the statistics you want. You put them in a brew and stir them up, and you get disaster for the black community. And we need not Band-Aids on carcinomas. We need serious, methodical solutions. And maybe this school system idea, might work for some communities. I wouldn't have thought of that idea. I mean, it's not how I think. And I certainly would not want an exclusively Afrocentric curriculum. I mean, that seems ridiculous to me. I mean, I'm a multicultural person. I want to see, why knock down the ethnocentrism of Europeans and then replace it with our own ethnocentrism? That seems to be ridiculous to me. You wanted to ask a follow-up question. Go ahead. I don't know if it'll help or not. I think having men and women in responsible capacities. When I was a kid, I don't know about you, when I went to elementary school, almost all my teachers, except for the principal, he who paddled everyone with a paddle he called Mr. Walnut, everyone else was a woman. And I didn't think about it. I mean, I love learning and I love school, right? But I noticed that he was a man. But I came from a very tight family where men, there were a lot of men around, and people got married, they didn't get divorced and all that stuff. So I don't know. In general, the quick answer to your question is sure. Having men around might be good. Having anything special. Scientists do studies all the time about that there is a certain factor of improvement in any study just because everybody's looking at you. You always have to account for that kind of difference that's automatic. So the results will be better at that school because it'll be a lab and everyone will be on their P's and Q's. But what's interesting to see what we'll be able in the long term to take out of that kind of notion. So I don't know if it'll work or not. But like I said, I wouldn't have thought of the idea. Yes? Excuse me. Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
So you're against speech and actions that are discriminatory?
Well, it depends. It depends on the case. That's what I've tried to say to him. I mean, it would depend. I'm probably very inconsistent. I generally go with what strikes me in the gut as bad and then justify it with my head. I think everybody else in this room does that, but I'm not sure they would acknowledge it. And I think but on the other hand, I defended Two Live Crew who are blatantly misogynistic and blatantly sexist. And the reason I did that, does anybody want to know? All right, right? And this will be it. You can ask 2 follow-ups and then we're going to go drink. There is a reception, right? I get something from my throat? Good. Two Live Crew. Okay. I got a phone call from John Pirelli, who writes for the Times, a music critic, and he asked me if I would comment on Two Live Crew and the fact that they'd been busted. And I'd seen it in the paper, but I hadn't listened to their music. So I went out. I said I hadn't done it. I hadn't listened to it, but I was going to try to get it. Call me back tomorrow. So I went out in Durham, North Carolina. Do you ever try to buy Two Live Crew in Durham, North Carolina? Looked everywhere. Finally found this brother, slipped him some money, slipped me the tape. Went back on my little stationary bicycle. I don't know if you ever ride a stationary bike, but it's the most boring thing on earth. And you need some music. This month, Black History Month, is James Brown month. And I put on James Brown, and I can get up and do this thing, which I have to do as part of my therapy for my hip. Also, I'm learning a lot about the English language. James Brown is the king of neologisms, but that too is another lecture. So anyway, I put this album on, and I listened to it. The first thing I noticed is that it has explicit parody. 2 explicit parodies come to mind readily. First is Two Live Blues, which takes the traditional form of the blues, explodes it. My baby left me, and I have never been so happy in my whole life. Last night, I slept with my neighbor's wife and broke up her happy home, right? That's great. I mean, that was really funny, so I laughed like hell at that. And then, Dick Almighty, right? When I talk about this, I try to euphemize it, but I can't. Penis Almighty does not exactly sound right. They took the worst stereotype about black men that were hypersexed animals, devoid of intellect, and they embrace it and explode it. So people have 5 feet long sex organs and 5 feet wide men and women, and all they want to do is have sex and all that. That's wonderful. I mean, I really think that was brilliant. But in addition to that, they're so blatantly misogynistic and so blatantly sexist that it didn't seem to me how anybody could take that seriously. That there's a way that it's so unrelenting that it comes out the other side. So what I did, I got so much hate mail. When that man stood up, it made me nervous. I said, God, this guy's going to come down here and beat my head. And I was going to change my tune, too. I was going to say, I was wrong, brother. Good night. So anyway, I write this. So the next day, Perales calls me back. I figured I had a take on this because what had happened was nobody was talking about it in terms of the tradition of signifying or playing the dozens, which is a very black thing. And there was a presupposition that black culture was transparent, that there were no phases of mediation between, a text and its interpretation, that any dummy could just, pick it up or listen to it and you could understand it immediately because there was no complexity there. And that's racist. That is racist, there's no other word for it. So I thought that I could do a take, and so I did that op-ed page piece, which some of you might have seen. Okay, so this is how my life changed. The first thing we had to do was get our phone unlisted because so many people called me who were upset. And then I got Santa Claus bags full of hate mail. My favorite, I have an anonymous correspondent from Oklahoma, or at least he mails the letters from Oklahoma. And this guy wrote me and he said, "Dear Skip, I really liked your essay on 2 Live Crew." He said, "In fact, I've been following your career and I know your parents are really proud of you because I knew your parents and really, I knew your mother." Yeah. It goes on for 2 pages, single-spaced, but intimate relationships with my mother, like the relationship between my mother and the German Shepherd that lived down the street, and the fact that my daughters are selling sex on the street, just stuff like that. But the most interesting letters I got, and I save all this stuff because I like to write, and I turn everything into an essay. So I'm a do something on that. But the most interesting letters I got were letters from rape victims or their mothers. Now, I got several of these, but they all happen to be white. I don't know why, but they all happen to be white. They all told me they were white. And they also said, how could I defend rape? And it never occurred to me that there was any connection to rape with my defense of 2 Live Crew. And I wrote them back and I said, I've never defend rape. People rape are sick. They should be treated and punished. But what is the connection between rap and rape? And I asked them back. And I asked them to send me documented cases of rape occurring after someone listened to rap music. And there are none. There are no documented cases in the entire United States. There's a visual pun between the word rap and rape with a silent E. That's it. But there is a vastly shared connection. And so I began to try to figure out where this attitude came from, which was what was producing all this hate mail. And what occurred to me was this. There is a belief that young black men, particularly from the inner city, are the equivalent of dry tinder, and that any idle spark can set them off. And when they're set off, they go wild. They go wilding, and they are set off by these lyrics because they have no control. Now, what more racist thing can you believe than that? Think about the lines from Madonna. I mean, let's look at Madonna closely. You don't have to thank me, just spank me. But nobody tries to arrest her because they're afraid all the white women in America are going to go out and enter SM relationships. Now, for those of you who are in SM relationships, I don't want to be quoted as having attacked them. I am a liberal person. But you see, they presume that Madonna's interpretive community, as Stanley Fish would put it, is much more sophisticated than 2 Live Crews. And that's wrong. I mean, that's wrong. And they busted them for that reason. You can't tell me that they did not bust these guys because they were virile young black men. Of all the people who talk dirty in the United States, they bust 2 black guys. That is ridiculous. It's easy to defend, to be called as an expert witness and defend, say, the New York Times and the Pentagon Papers. It's much harder to defend that angle of the elbow in the Mapplethorpe. I said in my article, and I said on the stand that, I have to tell you about the trial before I tell you that. So I'm called by the lawyer of 2 Live Crew. They asked me to be an expert witness. I'd never been in court before. So I said, great, this will be fun, going down there and testifying. And I was so pissed off, if you pardon my language, because of the response from all these people who were so upset with my essay, that I decided that I was going to do it and nobody else is going to testify for it. So I went down in October, and or late October or November, whenever it was, just this past fall. And I get there, raring to go, eager to testify. The judge has ordered me sequestered until my moment of testimony. I have no idea why, to this day, I have no idea why I had to be sequestered, but sequestered I was. Fort Lauderdale, 90 degrees, sequestered. That's what my life is like. But they let me read the paper. So, and what's on the front page of the Fort Lauderdale paper every day but an account of what had just happened in the trial? So I read it, right? They didn't tell me. It is this judge's criminal system, and I have to go along with what she says. So I read it. Second day of the trial, after it started, the jury petitions the judge for the right to laugh. If it had been a cartoon and I was holding this paper, a light bulb would have gone off over my head. As I said, we are in business at this testimony. Okay, cut to my day in court. Friday morning, it's about 10 o'clock. I'm sitting there on the stand. Two Live Crews lawyers asked me questions, a guy named Bruce Rogow. And so he asked me something about parody and all that. So I told him about parody. And then I turned to the jury and I said, let's take the impulse to laugh. I said, some people have the impulse to laugh at this music. Why do you do that? Because you're perverse or because it is meant to be funny? That the effect, see, intent in the law, as you know, just like some kinds of literary criticism, is not allowable as evidence, right? So whatever they intended is irrelevant. And that's one reason I did not talk to Luther Campbell. I was afraid that I would have to disqualify myself as a witness if we ever got around to talking about what he meant, because I could only talk about how I take it. And I said that the effect was parodic, and that's why they laughed. And they nodded their heads, almost every person on the jury. And it occurred to me at that time as we were having this exchange, that their effect on me was the same effect that Archie Bunker had, which is not to make you more racist, but to critique racism, not to make you more sexist, but to critique it. And the fact that this was just a regular cross-section of America, and they had been, you see, the trial was not about the album, it was about one of their performances. 2 or 3 undercover agents had made this surreptitious tape of a performance. So you could hear audience response. And the audience response, it was all white kids, middle-class white kids at some special party or something. And they laughed at it. They were not going out raping people. They just laughed at these lyrics, which is what the jury wanted to do. So I had audience response on my reader response, as it were, on my side as well. You could just hear it. And so that was it. And, they voted. And it just took about 2 hours, and they voted to acquit. And it was great. And the one thing I want to say to this audience, or any other audience, is that I talked about the long tradition in the black in the black vernacular cultural tradition of misogyny and sexism, and how sick it was. And that those of us who teach popular culture and black popular culture, have to teach its contradictions, as I said. You critique misogyny. You critique sexism. What do you do with the passages in Their Eyes Are Watching God when Tea Cake beats Janie? We don't throw the book away. You just say, this is a terrible thing. This is not a good thing. And am I finished? Almost? All right. Okay. So the final thing I'll say then is, if I had to do it over again, knowing all the flack that I took, I would do exactly the same thing. Thank you very much.
Don't leave yet. I have announcements. Okay, February 22nd, Haki Mahabuti will be here at 8 p.m. in the Curtis Auditorium. Sunday, February 17th at 8 p.m. in the Sunroom will be Leon Henderson. Tuesday, February 26th at 8 p.m. in the Sunroom will be, I'm going to destroy this, Alameen Jamil Abdullah, A-Trap Brown. And Thursday, February 28th at 8 p.m. will be Maki Mandela. Don't miss any of that, okay? Now you can leave.